Kevin Swenson, thank you for joining me today on Acquiring Minds.
Well, good to be here. Thank you.
Kevin, you are rolling up the appraisal industry, real estate appraisal. You grew up in the real estate business. You're bringing to bear your own direct experience in the appraisal sector of the real estate industry. According to what you told me on our pre-call, it is a classically highly fragmented sector, thousands of tiny appraisal businesses around the U.S. And you're doing this self-funded. So no investors as yet. I know that your strategy is kind of in flux, and we'll get into that. But you've already acquired your platform business, the first business that you're going to use to then go on and acquire others. So we're going to hear the story of that first acquisition, and then just really hear more about your strategy, what a one-man roll-up looks like, and how it's all unfolding. So start us off, Kevin, with some background on you, of course. Tell us about growing up in the real estate business, and then what your own direct career experience in real estate and real estate appraisal has been.
Yeah, thanks again, Will, for having me. I grew up in the real estate business. My family owned and ran a real estate licensing school along with real estate brokerage in the state of Utah. Had a lot of exposure to real estate through that, and a lot of interest, right? Mostly in the investment side. I spent some time with Marcus and Millchap during the 08, 09 timeframe in commercial real estate. And then the majority of my career has been on the valuation side. So since 09, I joined a national residential mortgage broker and set up their appraisal desk. Spent a lot of my career managing appraisal orders for residential transactions. Did some time, of course, appraising real estate myself, and then also have done a variety of really kind of startups, vertical integrating inside the real estate space. So with that lender, we converted that appraisal desk to an appraisal management company so it could be a profit center. And then also I had an opportunity to join an appraiser who, I identified it as one of the best appraisers we worked with nationally, and worked with him for a while, figuring out kind of how he was able to scale quality and service. And then I had this vision of taking that at scale, right? Taking the ability to output a lot of appraisals in a quality manner with higher level service that I wasn't really experiencing as the manager of an appraisal desk, right? As someone who was ordering, thousands of appraisers monthly across the nation, we had a lot of challenges with the service level that we were receiving from appraisers as well as quality. Mm-hmm. So I took this vision to an appraisal management company to start up their appraisal firm. Began recruiting a number of appraisers and implementing, process to what we were doing, and had some
Kevin,
success.
Let me stop you there because I want to give people a definition of appraisal generally. People will know what that is, but just a little bit of the history of it and how relevant it was in the 2008-2009 timeframe, and then also what appraisal versus appraisal management means. So first, at the risk of talking down to people, tell them what appraisal means exactly and what its role is in a transaction, because it is important that they understand.
Sure, absolutely. So, a lender, right? When a lender's giving money, right, they're going to want collateral in a real estate transaction. The real estate is the collateral, and they want to have some substance, some knowledge of what the value of that real estate is, right? And so that's what an appraisal is, right? An appraisal, by definition, it's an opinion of value based on facts, right? So an appraiser is hired to develop an opinion of value. And So lenders will order appraisals so that they're comfortable lending on, they're comfortable with the collateral that is the basis for the loan. And an appraisal management company, really, they came about based on regulation and changes to the industry in the '09 timeframe. I'm not going to go in great detail, but essentially, Fannie and Freddie, in the FHA and so on and so forth, they wanted a third party to be responsible for selecting who the appraiser is. They wanted to make sure there wasn't bias associated with that opinion of value, right? So a loan originator, right, who's going to be compensated for a loan closing, they don't want that loan originator to pick a specific appraiser who they might have influence over the value that they are able to select. And so the industry evolved in '09 significantly, such that there really were two options. A lender can either set up an appraisal department, appraisal desk that has very specific compliance rules, or they can send those appraisal orders through an appraisal management company, right? So an appraisal management company is going to receive a volume of orders from these lenders, and then they divvy out those orders out to individual appraisers or appraisal companies.
So they represent kind of a layer, a firewall, if you will, between the appraisers and the lenders that theoretically ensures neutrality and lack of kickbacks and bias and influence.
That's exactly what it's about. Yeah.
And just so people are clear, in 2009, I agree with you. Let's not do too much of a history lesson, but basically what was happening is the incredible run up in real estate prices that was happening from 2002 or 3 or 4 for the next few years, for lenders to be able to make a loan on a condo, and to, say it was worth $1 million, the appraisers have to agree that in fact it's worth $1 million. And so obviously the lender might want to influence that appraiser for the appraiser to say, yes, in fact, we agree that this condo appraises at $1 million, when in fact, maybe it shouldn't have, or it didn't, or, the real underlying market value wasn't quite $1 million. And so you get enough of this misbehavior and you just get an acceleration of appreciation market wide that results in collapse. Right. I mean, that's right. one piece of the complex jigsaw puzzle that was the real estate induced crash of 2008 or 9. But it was a key piece because things have to appraise for these loans to occur.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. And so just personally, why do you is it just because you have experience in appraisal? Why do you like the appraisal sector of real estate versus the myriad other things you could be doing in real estate, like real estate itself? Like buying and selling buildings yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of interest at all levels of real estate, frankly. I expressed that I spent some time in commercial side and that, I had done a number of flipping, off and on throughout my career. I love the numbers side of it, right? And so that's why I gravitated more to commercial. I love digging down into the numbers. The appraisal piece for me has been more managing a business, right, than it is actually appraising. But yeah, no, it's all around interesting for me.
Okay, so you're getting all this experience and standing up an appraisal desk and working with thousands of appraisers to hire them to do appraisals, seeing that the service level is not what it should be. The quality of the work is not what it should be. You've worked with somebody you kind of consider the best in the biz. This one gentleman was right. Right. And what made him so good? And was he a one-man operation? How big? If not, how big was his firm? I'm just curious what the gold standard looks like in the appraisal world.
Yeah, gosh, the standard's gotten really low, frankly. Right. And part of it is it's difficult to scale. It's difficult to scale appraising, right? So if it takes 8 hours per report for an appraiser to complete an assignment, right, and he's doing 10 files a week, right, when volume increases significantly, right? Based on the number of appraisers that are out there, we're asking appraisers to do 3-4 times that, right? And they can't scale at that level, right? And if
Yeah.
we can get their volume down to, 3 hours per report, well, then they can scale much better, right? And that's really what's needing to happen in the industry. So the challenges that we were experiencing, frankly, I'll probably shouldn't say this, but this is a reality, right? There are assignments, right, where we had an appraiser who repeatedly for 2 weeks in a row, right? Every single day we're reaching out to him, and every day he's saying, "You'll have it tomorrow. You'll have it tomorrow," right?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we used that appraiser again, right? Even after completing that assignment, because in that particular market where he's at, he's the best option of the worst options we have, right? And so there's appraisers. I think there's a lot of things that have happened to the industry. I mean, one of the challenges of the compliance piece is the accountability is a little bit different. So appraisers don't feel like it's important to give updates on the report on what, that it's scheduled and when it's scheduled for, and then it's been inspected, and in fact, to them it's perceived as obnoxious that we're asking those types of questions, because they don't have significant empathy for what it means to be a real estate agent, where you're managing a transaction and expectations, and it's emotional, it's important.
Yeah.
And so they don't have
there's time.
Yeah, they don't have a lot of empathy.
Ticking clock. Yeah.
So they don't have a lot of empathy for that, and so that's a challenge, right? We're not getting updates, and then I don't know if we want to go into quality, but the training for appraisers is a challenge, and so a lot of appraisers don't have a great way to go about supporting their opinion of value.
So well, but take us now to the opportunity that you saw and the thesis that you developed.
Yeah. So, I was experiencing a lot of pain, right? So it was not receiving those updates and seeing turn times that were prolonged. And, there are certain appraisers out there they're not one-man shops, right? So most of these appraisers are one-man shops. So they are doing all of the work, which ends up being data entry, right? Scheduling phone calls, doing their accounting, their accounts receivable, and they end up not being able to do managing all of that very well. And the best appraisers, right? And this is kind of going back to the appraiser I went and worked with, right? So the best appraisers, I'd had conversations with them. We were very relationship focused. We felt like if we can discover and find the best appraisers and get them the highest volume of work, right, that's going to erase the pains that we're experiencing in fulfilling appraisal orders. And so, that's really what it comes down to is if we can bring some specialization, right? So the appraiser's not scheduling a phone call, right? He doesn't have to put his headspace into scheduling. A lot of the data entry, right? A lot of that can remove from the appraiser, and the people doing the data entry, there's things that they can do to make the review easy for the appraisers. Because at the end of the day, it is the appraiser's responsibility. It's their license that's on the line 100% for that report. But there's definitely a lot of things an appraiser can do to take his 8 hours per assignment down to closer to 3 hours.
So the idea is these 1 and 2 person operations, or maybe primarily 1 person operations, they're doing all of their own back office, if you will. And if you can kind of do that for them as the parent organization, so that they're just focused on doing the true appraisal work itself, that reduces the total cost of a project from 8 to 3 or 4 hours. And you can then recruit appraisers better because you're providing, this home where all the junk that they hate, the paperwork they hate dealing with, is done for them in the background, and they're just out there doing pure appraisal work. This reminds me of that this model probably exists all over the place, but in your world of real estate, Compass, which is a name people will probably recognize, Compass's strategy, I think, has been different things at different times, but fundamentally they rolled up real estate brokerages, and I think their pitch was, all of we'll kind of tech enable you, Mr. or Mrs. Real Estate Agent, with all of this kind of stuff in the background, the CRM, the whatever, to make you, to allow you to do what you do best, which is, managing a transaction, showing people homes, listing homes, and let us take the rest of the crap off your plate, sort of thing. Is that kind of a fair analogy?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, at the end of the day, an appraiser's job is going to be more fulfilling, right? When they're spending their time and space inside their max value offering, right? And what we can pay them the most money for, which is their analysis, right? Yeah. And let's take as much of that other stuff away from them, and so that they can spend more time in that. And it's not just more time in that, but it also allows them to, like really the benefits are significant, not just from, now they're doing more volume of orders, but the reality is their quality increases, right? Because there's more people reviewing their work. There's more specialization in the work that's done on the report. By doing more transactions, they get better at the analysis. They save time. Yeah. They save drive time, right? When they're doing more assignments per day, right? Their drive time per order goes down. There's seasonality associated with the business, right? And so their slower months will experience higher transaction volume because, their overall transaction volume increases, allows them to take on more clients. There's a lot of benefits, not just from a income perspective, but also just from a more rewarding, fulfilling job where you're not doing data entry and scheduling. You're spending more time doing real estate analysis. So.
And are there appraisal firms around the country that have cracked this, or at least a little bit, so that they're 20-person, 40-person shops? And I assume that the way, if such a shop exists, they've gotten there because they're kind of implementing a model like you described, where they're taking a lot of the stuff off the appraiser's plate. Are there any models of this that already exist?
Yeah. So the commercial side, I think it's been this way to a certain degree for a longer period of time. On the residential side, very little, but it's changing fast. So, like I said, in 2015 is when I started doing this. I didn't really know of anybody doing it at any sort of scale. In the last, and even a year and a half, it was interesting. I had, through Twitter, right, was able to meet somebody doing some roll-ups in Australia, done 250 plus acquisitions, and it was a super interesting conversation with him because of the questions he was asking me. And the end of the conversation with him, it was basically, wow, Kevin, right? Like, you're on the early end of a roll-up here. There's really nobody starting to do it. Well, since he and I had that conversation, quickly there's a number of very large firms beginning roll-ups that I've run into as I've talked to sellers. So it's happening for sure. There's, a half dozen that they're starting to do this model. My belief, right? Maybe it's silly. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but my belief is that the industry will completely consolidate. Again, from being the client, right? The person ordering appraisals. I don't like the current structure. I wasn't getting the quality and service, but these large professional companies can give me a much better. They could give me a much better quality and service. It just makes a lot more sense. So I think it's going to just continue to consolidate.
Mm-hmm. So on the point of consolidation, so you developed this thesis that you shared with us, and you set out to do a roll-up as an individual, not as part of a fund or a larger organization. So what did you imagine the mechanics of that being? The platform acquisition and then bolt-on after bolt-on after bolt-on sort of thing? Talk us through that.
Yeah, so I'm definitely learning as I go, right? And I would say I've always been open to investors, but I felt like I want to prove out my thesis first, right? So
Mm-hmm.
just have more control over a greater number of amount of equity if I can really get the ball rolling first.
Yeah.
And so, my first plan was, hey, let's just max out SBA first. Let's show the ability to implement some process to these companies and increase the revenue through that process. And then at that point, we'll identify the next step, right? Whether it's bringing on equity to continue, or whether we're able to generate increased cash flow to continue to invest at a pace that works with, the goals that we have. Also, thought through kind of some creative strategies. So I don't know if we talked about this earlier, but basically, I had two acquisitions that I almost did at the same time, and there are multiple reasons why that didn't happen. I'm not sure it's a good idea to do two at the same time, especially in your first acquisition. But that seller ended up being more interested in a partnership structure. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm super interested in that model itself because of the build opportunity. And it looks like this, right? So $2 million purchase price. Instead of acquiring for 2 million, it's, hey, I'll acquire for 3 million within a 3 to 5 year time period. That's the option to purchase piece. And then there's a joint venture piece to that. And it's, hey, I'm going to come in, I'm going to take over the back office process for your appraisers. And through that, we're going to take their, the 2.5, 3 million in revenue and push it as high as we can, right? The process has the ability to double the revenue. And so the idea being that we can fund that acquisition, that $3 million acquisition, through potentially two things, both that significant increase in revenue as well as multiples expansion, right? By going and doing this option to purchase joint venture with multiple sellers. And I'd say I have two sellers that are interested in that model. And so that may be something I do.
Do they, when you, if you do this deal structure, do they get is there any sort of payday immediately? Or is there only a payday if and when you acquire at that agreed upon price, whatever you said, like a year, did you say a year later, or maybe you didn't give a time frame, but
yeah, it's going to take some time. So 3 to 5 years is the amount of time I want to do it. 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the goal would be to do it in the 2 to 3 year mark. I think 3 years is much more realistic. As far as upfront payment, right, there's mm-hmm. some legal costs that I would cover, but not looking to, it requires some courting, right? It requires the seller, me, and we have to get comfortable with working together. They have to understand the vision that I have, and if there's buy-in to that, which seems to be, right? Like, I speak the appraiser's language. I get their business. I have a unique perspective from being the client, right, and seeing higher volume of orders and variety of ways that appraisers work. So I'm not necessarily looking to put a lot of money down. It's, hey, let's do this together. There's outs, right? There's for sure outs. The idea is that there's increased revenue, right? So there is potential for them to benefit from a cash flow perspective during that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Kevin, tell us about the story of your first acquisition. So your platform acquisition.
Yeah. So I'd share this. Like, I was searching for a long time, right? I'm going to back up and just share. Hopefully, this is information that is helpful. But I went through kind of this. Oh, I really want to do an acquisition, right? It makes a whole lot of sense to. It's when I left the firm where I was building the appraisal firm. I left because I needed equity, and I wasn't an equity owner. And I left with the idea, gosh, I can do an acquisition in, roll things up. So I started learning about how do you do an acquisition. Came into Buy Then Build, joined Walker's lab, right, the acquisition lab, and
Yep.
Through that process, I was started looking for appraisal firms. Looked for a long time. I've seen like 10 sales happen. Had conversations with some buyers. Learned a lot, but I didn't get super aggressive until last March, where I said, okay, I got to do an acquisition. Let's go now. I have a massive database, 40,000 appraisal companies. I identified, 30 in the top markets that I wanted to look that were the largest firms. Reached out to 30, had 8 phone conversations that led to 4 interested sellers that I still have interactions with today. The acquisition that I actually did wasn't from that list of 30. It wasn't in a market I was interested in. It was listed with a broker. I fell in love more or less with that acquisition because I was trying to find the best platform. And these sellers, there's 2 sellers, uniquely were, I wouldn't call them appraisers. I'd call them MBA quality business owners first, appraisers second. And so it's a lot of what they...
Were they the founders?
They were the founders. Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's why I went with that particular acquisition, is that it wasn't quite the size I wanted, right? Just under 3 million in revenue. But there was a lot of good things about that business. So went ahead with that acquisition. I used SBA, deal numbers. I had basically seen appraisal companies, if they're really small, right, 2 to 4 SDE, really not quite 4. And I acquired on the high end. I think there were 2 reasons why I was okay acquiring on the high end of that is the quality of the business and then the terms that I was able to get. So, purchase price right around 2.5 million. The terms, for better or worse, right? I chased a 5% down deal, right? So, and that was because I was trying to max out SBA on two deals with the equity I had. So I had a 5% standby note for 10 years, 10-year standby. And then I had another 15% note with I think it was 1 year standby, 5-year balloon, 10-year amortization on that. So while I did a low down SBA, I felt okay with it because my debt service coverage was pretty solid in the 1.75 area.
So wait, it was 5% from you, 5% full standby, 15% the balloon seller note. So that's 25%, and then so 75% SBA.
Right. Yep.
Right. Which gave you that favorable debt coverage ratio.
Exactly.
Okay. And so you said it was a $2.5 million acquisition at around, approaching 4x. So my math says that's what, 650, 700 SDE,
yep.
Something like that. Great. Cool. And I remember you saying on our pre-call that you have this roll-up strategy, of course. It's really what's driving things, but you also you have a nice hedge in the fact that if you buy a really healthy, solid platform company and the roll-up doesn't quite work out in the way that you thought, you still made a great investment in the form of that first platform company. Did I get that right? And do you still feel that way?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm a believer in finding something that both you've got a build opportunity in your acquisition and then also just like when you've got experience and network to help you through it, like that's an advantage. And so I feel like I have that, right? We definitely have experienced some challenges, right? The market's a little bit challenging right now. But yeah, definitely. Like I'm pretty confident in the ability to continue to do some acquisitions, but regardless, right? I'm in a space I'm interested in. I'm confident in its success. Yeah.
And putting aside the roll up for a moment, just let's say you just kind of were going to acquire this business and then plan to grow it organically, and maybe some bolt-ons, but you weren't explicitly trying to do a roll up. You have all this experience in real estate and appraisal, as is evident throughout our whole conversation. And I think you just touched on it, but you said it more directly to me in our pre-call that you have a philosophy about that, where you're a big believer in leveraging expertise to do an acquisition, rather than what a lot of folks do who might be kind of generalists, and they might kind of look at a lot of different industries. And if they like the characteristics of an industry or of a particular company within an industry, they'll go for it for that reason rather than their own experience in said industry. So put that in your own words, please, because
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm going to say two things, Will. Hopefully I'm saying what you want to hear, but one, just like the big light bulb that came on for me, like the whole reason I fell in love with acquisition was, right, I was vertically integrating for an appraisal management company. I was building an appraisal firm. And there was a huge light bulb that came on to me why I was there. It was, okay, these guys have X amount of revenue that is in a business that generates 10% net profit margins. And they're able to send 30% of their work potentially to a sister company that they also own, that to a business that generates 20% margin. And not only that, there's an intimate relationship between both of those companies that allows the appraisal firm, in my opinion, should be as or more competitive than another appraisal firm out there, because appraisal management company can say, hey, we love when you do this, we hate when you do that, right? Change it. Just lots of advantages in that vertical integration. And it's not so dissimilar than what I was doing at the lender level, setting up an appraisal department that converted into an appraisal management company. So intimate, like, knowledge of the customer to cater what we did to the customer. But also we're getting this, we have this revenue that we don't have to go market with to get us to stand us up. And then we can grow from there. Right. So I would say that was a big piece. I don't see or hear it a lot in the business acquisition space, but that's where I got the big idea is, if I can buy a business, whether it's an appraisal business or whatever, that I can then do a startup off of it to vertically integrate. To me, gosh, that's pretty powerful. And then the other part that you were talking about, right? Like, I use geeky terms to say this, but find your sure thing, right? Lean into your experience. That's what I've done, right? So as I was going through the acquisition lab with Walker Diable, it was completely with, I don't have to do this appraisal thing. It's I just want to do acquisition. Like, this is great. And I ended up sticking with the appraisal piece for so many reasons. And Walker definitely helped me with getting clarity on that. But a huge part of it is gosh, I look at a lot of acquirers that are going away from their experience. And I just think that you can lean into your network that can be super powerful if you stay in a space that you know. There's lots of surprises. It doesn't matter what business you acquire, you will experience surprises. I have, right? It's going to happen. And if you can do it in an industry that you're familiar with the knowledge that you have, it helps with your build, right? It helps, you can pull certain levers to do better. And then when you experience challenges, you already know the people to talk to. You've maybe already seen a variance of this challenge before to be able to work through it. And so and it's the lingo too, right? The language that you have with clients, you already know the language. And I would even go back further to this, like, this alone potentially could be the reason to stay in your sure thing. And that is conversations with sellers, right? So I reached out to 30 and had 8 conversations. That's
a huge hit
for
rate.
Proprietary search. That's a pretty good hit rate. And at least one of them said, hey, I received, this type of outreach all the time. You're the first person called, right? And it's because they could directly see the experience I had. And I really think the friction of search, if you can find your sure thing and stick inside that lane, I think that your time to do due diligence, your time to even decide what your offer price is, like a lot of the friction in the search just disappears. I also think you can raise capital easier. I'm a big believer in finding your sure thing. And if you look, there's a couple guys out there like me that have stayed in a very niche lane that have, I think, experienced similar reduced friction in their search.
Yeah. I think that is all hard to argue with. My only reaction is if you really like the path of acquisition, entrepreneurship, and you don't have a sure thing, or you want to leave your industry, or you don't see an opportunity necessarily within your industry. I mean, you had this light bulb moment within your industry that kind of set you on the path to acquisition. And others kind of hear about acquisition entrepreneurship first, and they don't necessarily have a light bulb moment with respect to the industry that they're already in. And then the other thing I'd say is like, what you hear over and over from my guests is, especially, which is often that they've acquired into an industry that they don't know, that they're an outsider to. They just spend those first 6 months learning, humility. And they really hit the books, and, they come in just like sponges, hoping that, they can learn in 6 months' time what it takes other people to 2 or 3 years to learn, because they're so incentivized to learn and they're so proactive about it, because they're like, obviously I need to learn at an accelerated rate here. So no question that, probably from day one, you didn't need to, not to say you didn't need to learn stuff, but like you probably felt like from day one, you could kind of hit the ground running. And many acquisition entrepreneurs, it's, day, 6 month in day one is when they feel like they can start actually doing stuff and making changes. And so, yeah, that would be nice to not have to do that. I just, I know that if I make an acquisition, it's very likely to not be based on a sure thing. So I'm just kind of thinking through and my own reaction to hearing what you say. Nice to have, but not a need to have, maybe.
Totally. And I'd share two thoughts to what you just said. The humility is huge, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing. And I also am a huge believer in acquisitions, in your sure thing or not, just on the basis that you will learn more and at an accelerated pace. It's not just that humility, it's that accountability. Yeah. The weight of ownership forces you to learn at an accelerated pace, period. So, which I think is great for people in any career, right? Like, find that weight. And I would say, while I wasn't an owner in the opportunities I've done, I felt the weight, right? Like, these were kind of unique circumstances. While they were inside a corporate umbrella, there was a weight of accountability that accelerated my learning. The other thing I would say is, I'm a believer in this. I don't see it. I don't know how it happens, but I think it makes a ton of sense. And I've considered doing it inside the appraisal space. And that is, if you don't have a sure thing, go find someone with a sure thing and leverage theirs, right? So I've considered, hey, here's an appraisal acquisition. I've already maxed my SBA capacity, not ready to do this acquisition, but hey, ETA entrepreneur, let's go do this one together, right? I'm going to be able to have the lack of friction and getting the seller on board, able to support them, but they're still going to have the weight and ability to learn. And I think that's not a bad idea for ETA entrepreneurs to go find people with a sure thing and piggyback off of that. There's ways to make it a win-win situation for both parties. But like, I'm a believer in ETA. Like, I don't disagree with you, Will. Like, there's not one way to do it.
Yeah. Kevin, because of your experience in real estate, I will see broker deals, even on Biz Buy Sell, other businesses for sale that are within the real estate industry, such as title companies or home inspection companies. And my understanding is that, at least in those two cases, those are also very fragmented industries. Any quick thoughts on any of either those two in particular, or any of these sub industries within the real estate ecosystem?
Yeah. So, I'd start with this. Like one thing, again, like during my clarities phase where I was like, do I want to stick with the appraisal or go another route? One of the things that I had researched was SBA default data. And it's
Hmm.
kind of interesting over the last 10 years, what industry had the lowest amount of default? Real estate, right? But that's totally deceptive because if you go 10 years prior, right, that 10-year prior period, what had the highest amount of defaults? Real estate,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's a cyclical industry, right? When me going into this acquisition, like I was expecting to close in January, closed late March. Um, as I was seeing things happen, right? My expectation was January is going to be the worst month I'd seen in more than 10 years inside the industry. But I went for it anyway, right? I went into this with my eyes wide open. It's a cyclical industry. It has some challenges, and it totally does. So that's what I would say is real estate. There's definitely opportunities, and especially if you understand it, go for it. But you probably should use less leverage. This is the guy that used as much leverage as he could. You probably should use less leverage. You should definitely risk test it to it being a harsher industry, not a greater industry. But yeah, there's opportunities inside the title space. It's a relationship business, right?
Yeah.
So make sure you understand that really well, and it really comes down to real estate agents, right? So just understand it. But I think there's opportunities. Like, will I have grand, big visions? Really, honestly, of going inside and outside a vertical integrated company inside the real estate services space. So I'm a believer in it, but there's some unique challenges for sure.
So now that you're into the acquisition, so you remind me when you said you closed your month 3?
March 28th. So
March 28th. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just outside 3 months.
How's it going? And now being in the seat, and also what's going on in the macro economy and the real estate market, does that affect your strategy and how you're thinking about this roll up in the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah. So, God, the industry's like I said this earlier, right? I expected the month of January and the year really to be quite a bit down market size. I did not expect the Fed to raise rates at the pace that they have. So they've raised rates probably at a pace never done before. Yeah. And so that's impacted transactions, right? So transaction volume is down significantly, down about 50%. And that's having some impact. The acquisition I did had a component of residential, 50% residential, 50% commercial. And, I went back and forth on the pros and cons of both of those. Right now, I'm really grateful. The commercial piece is not impacted, right? And that's at least not yet. That's historically the case, right? So there's definitely some diversification benefits that have helped significantly. With revenue down, though, it's a little bit of a difficult conversation to acquire someone whose revenue's going to be down, right? So that value conversation that was being easy for me, right? It was a fairly easy conversation for me to, get into SDE or EBITDA or whatever, and then talk about multiple. But now when we're talking about, that SDE number, right? What is it?
Yeah.
Because we don't know what this year's going to look like, and we don't know what next year's going to look like. So there's some challenges there. But I say the big thing, right? I'm actually trying to convert the challenges of the market into a good thing. And the way I see of doing that is it's easier to recruit appraisers in a down market. So bringing them to my company, that's a lot easier to do when volume's down and they're hungry. But if I don't have volume of orders for them, right, are they going to stay? And so I'm super interested in doing an acquisition of an appraisal management company. I've owned I haven't owned, but I've ran an appraisal management company. I've been the general manager, totally responsible for appraisal management companies. So I've done it before. I know the space very well. But really what the advantage is I can take that appraisal management company to help me grow organically at the appraisal firm level by sending a certain portion of that business from the appraisal management company to the appraisal firm, and really focusing on providing a superior quality and service with that appraisal firm to that appraisal management company and other appraisal management companies and lenders. So, like, too many words to say this, but a pretty big pivot, right? Instead of focusing on appraisal firm acquisitions exclusively, kind of pivoting to, okay, let's go raise some capital, let's go acquire an appraisal management company, because really that's going to accelerate the growth of the appraisal firm.
And you had always envisioned some vertical integration. So buying the appraisal management company was in the plans. It's just that's been pulled forward is what's changed.
Yeah. So so there's two things about the appraisal firm. Like, it's a lot more fun to solve the problems of the industry at the appraisal firm level, right? And the appraisal management company, like, they don't have a lot of control over fixing the challenges. That's at the appraisal firm level. And so that's why my focus and emphasis up front was at that level. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense today to acquire an appraisal firm. Like, their revenues are down too, right? That conversation of what is EBITDA or SD is much more challenging. I have some pretty specific strategies that I think allow me to take that on, partly because I want to control the AMC, but I don't need to be 100% owner, right? And so there's ways for me to acquire and in this down market that make a lot of sense for the seller. And I think really kind of my whole play makes sense to the opportunity.
And are there no regulations around the appraisal management? Like, could you just, if you were able to take ownership or take control of an appraisal management company, what's to stop you from just having 100% of its business, just sending you 100% of its business? Can they do that, or is there some regulation there that they have to divvy it up, a third and a third and a third, or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, technically, I guess they could do that. There isn't a regulatory reason not to. That's a challenge for multiple levels, right? Just as a manager of an appraisal management company, right? You just having that many appraisers right away to do that in the first place is not going to be possible. There's a lot of challenges, right? From a scalability perspective, as an appraisal management company, you're receiving a lot of orders over a broader geographic area than an individual appraisal firm is going to be able to cover.
Because an appraisal management company probably works across multiple markets. Whereas an appraiser is going to just be a local, very hyper local shop.
Right, and that's why I've got to go raise capital, right, for the appraisal management company, because from an acquisition side, right, so 40,000 appraisal firms, right, with most of them being one-man shops. Appraisal firms, I don't know the number, but you're 2,000 across the country, right? So a much smaller number, and the average size is, like, I don't know, right? Probably one of the smaller revenues of an appraisal management company would be in the $5 to $10 million in revenue. Oh. So like my dream would go do a $25 million appraisal management company acquisition right now.
And these appraisal management companies, they all sprouted in the last 10 years. I mean, the category didn't exist prior to the Great Recession.
Sure, it existed, but just not in large part, right? Okay. So I think what was more common are these one-off type transactions. The lenders were doing for, like, verification of occupancy, things like that. They existed, but not in large part.
Okay. Kevin, is there anything more that you want to add that I haven't asked you?
I think you've done a great job. I think you've asked some good questions. Nothing comes to mind. This has been fun.
Well, this is choppy waters ahead for all of us. But the market is very fluid at the moment. And it sounds like you're a guy who adapts his strategy to facts on the ground. So I suspect if we talk again in a year, things may be different and your strategy may have evolved. And so good excuse to get you back on. But thanks for your time, Kevin, and your transparency.
Thanks again, Will. It's been a lot of fun.